Good day, everybody. This is Rich Larson from Watermark Learning. We're going to start the webinar in just about 8 minutes from now. If you are new to the GoToWebinar format, I really encourage you to locate the question panel and send me in your name, your location, and what the weather in your part of the world. Just get used to sending in questions. Even if you're familiar with it, I'd love to hear from you. So please take a moment to look at that now, send it on into me, and that kind of gets yourself ready for submitting questions, and then we'll get started in just a couple. Thanks. Hello again from Watermark Learning. This is Rich Larson. I want to welcome you to this month's edition of the IIBA Certification Chat. We're going to get started at the top of the hour, but before we do, I just want to let you know a couple things. One, the slides that you see scrolling in front of you, you're going to get a copy of those. In fact, you can download them now if you'd like, if you go to the handout section of GoToWebinar. We also make them available afterwards if you want to rely on the email that we're going to send out. Number two, a recording of this will also be available to you. So if you have to duck out during it or leave early or whatever, you'll get a copy of the recording that we'll send via a link. Third, you are invited to submit questions through the GoToWebinar panel. That's how we run the Q&A portion of this, is you just write the questions out, then submit it to me. I'll read them out loud and answer them on the fly. And if I have follow-up questions, I'll ask you, and then just shoot in a follow-up GoToWebinar question, and we're good to go. I see Karen from New Brunswick, Canada is checking in. Hello. And the rest of you folks, if you could just look at the GoToWebinar question panel, send me in your name, your location, anything like that to get used to using this. If you already have a question, please feel free to send it in too, and I'll just keep it queued up for when we get started, which will be in just a couple minutes. Thank you. Welcome, welcome. This is Rich Larson from Watermark Learning, and this is the May edition of our IIBA certification chat, a monthly forum that we've been holding for several years. And I think it's helped people get some quick questions as well as detailed questions, and feel free to attend as many of these as you want between now and the end of your certification journey. I've even had people attend after they become certified, either because they want to ask questions about recertification or running up study groups for them. So anything is fair game, so I welcome all your questions. I have a couple of polls to show you, but I want to encourage you to locate the GoToWebinar question panel and submit your questions that way. I see one question right now from Alex, and as I'm waiting for you to submit some more questions, maybe I could just do a couple of quick announcements. If you could see on the slide that we'll have our next Q&A session in June. We also have a couple classes coming up. In June, we have our next CBAP as well as July. And I want to make an announcement too that starting now, Watermark is going to be offering monthly CBAP CCBA classes, so that no matter when you want to start your certification journey or end it, a lot of times people take a class at the end right before they're ready to take their exam. We'll have you covered each month. ECBA, we tend not to run classes because of the demand and maybe the nature of the exam, but we have something called Anytime Learning that you can use. It's a great way to prepare. Our next IIBA-AAC class starts June 26th. Okay, good. I see some questions coming on in. Thank you very much. We're going to get started with that. Alex asked, for CBAP or CCBA, are we expected to memorize financial formulas? First of all, I would say no, nothing complex. Certainly nothing that has any kind of a formula to it. Even ROI kind of calculations or net present value, those kind of things are too complicated to test you on. However, there will be math involved in the exam, we've heard from past attendees. And second part of your question, Alex, can we use a notepad or calculator? Calculator, no, you cannot take anything into the exam booth. Even your own pencil is not allowed. They will give you a whiteboard, so you could do some sketching on that with the whiteboard to do your math, so you don't have to try to do it in your head. But basically, that's what you're limited to. And they'll, of course, confiscate the whiteboard and the marker when you're done. They do that to try to keep the exam integrity. But you should expect some math. I would be familiar with the formulas, but I don't think you should memorize them. Hello, Mukesh from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. It must be in the middle of the night there, or at least pretty late, right? I want to know whether there are questions in the CBAP exam outside the BA, must be BABAC content, BA body knowledge. I heard that there are many numericals recently. Well, There are questions, mainly, 98% of the questions, I would say, pretty much come directly from the BA body of knowledge. Now, what that means is that you could end up having questions be testing you on things that are extrapolations of it. So for instance, you mentioned there are many numericals recently. Well, the numericals might be as a result of some issue happening. Let's say you're trying to uncover a business need and you're trying to gauge how bad the company might be losing money or whatever, and you might have to calculate the net loss, for instance. This is kind of a follow-up to the first question. So you might need to do some math in order to figure that out. But the basic question comes out of the BABAC, understanding current state and getting at a business need is really definitely straight out of the BABAC. So you really want to emphasize that you should focus mainly on the BABAC when you're doing your studying, as well as anything that can help you understand the BABAC. Okay, Damalier is saying best tips for passing the CBAP exam. One thing I'm going to draw your attention to in this slide deck that you're seeing kind of going back and forth are a number of different slides on a variety of things, one of which is top 10 CBAP, CCBA prep tips. And just to kind of quickly go through them, first you need to do a significant amount of study. Our research shows that our average attendee, or survey taker, I should say, spend about 100 hours on average to pass a CBAP. Some of that might be in a class if you take a class, so bear that in mind. Number two, we always urge you to read through the BA body of knowledge at least once. At least once. Many people have found benefit from reading our study guide. That's certainly not a requirement, but we wrote the guide to make it more understandable, and we've gotten a lot of good feedback about that over the years. So that's an alternative if you're struggling with the BABAC. What we also urge you to do is study a chapter at a time, and then do practice questions, whether you're using a tool like our online study exam or any of your questions you make up, or maybe you're in a study group. This is great when you are in a IIBA study group. They typically study a chapter at a time, either once a week, once a month, or whatever the time frame, and do practice questions. When you look at your results, if your scores on your practice exams, and particularly our drills are very good this way because they help you look at your score immediately. If you're less than 80%, go back and study the chapter some more, because that indicates you're not going to get a passing score. Go through. Tip 5 is make sure you read all of the BABAC sections. Certainly the core knowledge areas you're going to be tested on. The techniques, for sure, there's another huge important chapter. The underlying competencies you'll be tested on, not nearly as extensively as the techniques, so bear that in mind. Likewise, the BA core concepts and the introduction chapter, you'll get some questions from there. Again, they're not nearly as tested as the core knowledge areas and techniques. After you got all the BABAC chapters, then I think you should do simulations. Another thing that people get anxious over is sitting down for a 100+ question exam in 3 or so hours and having to perform like that in an exam booth. I know when I took my PMP, it was really stressful. That was the first major exam I had taken since college, and I got that before IIBA even existed, and I stressed out over it, but I had done a lot of preparation, had a lot of practice questions. I think that helped me through it. Number 7, if your exam scores on any knowledge area when you do the simulations are less than 80%, go back and reread that section, or at least look at the sections where you're struggling. Another tip, I know this seems kind of silly and basic and not even worth mentioning, but it is worth mentioning. Get plenty of rest before your exam. The best thing you can do is have a rested brain and body before you go into your exam. The worst thing you can do is stress out and stay up till 2 a.m. studying, last minute cramming. That's not going to help your exam performance. Number 9 is somewhat for debate, but I've always believed in doing what's called a brain dump at the exam start. It helps you relieve test anxiety. I did an extensive list when I took my PMP, because there are a lot of formulas you did need to memorize for that. I had a smaller list, but still had a list for the CBAP. And in both cases, you were allowed to write down on a piece of paper. Now, you still can do a brain dump, but you're given that whiteboard, as I mentioned before. I think that the best thing that I can advise you is that writing down some key formulas and some key things you memorize. Let's say you write down the knowledge areas or some key tasks within a knowledge area that were giving you trouble. It helps you get started on a positive note. Even writing down on top of your board, I will pass this exam, has been proven in at least one study that I've run across to help improve test performance. Now in AAC, you can't do that. AAC, the reason we mention that is that you take a proctored exam on a computer at home. And so you're not allowed to have anything in your exam area. So that you can't quite do that, but that exam I don't think is as hard. Number 10, this may be the best nugget I can offer you. Maybe some of the others are, but the fact is when you take your exam, don't feel obligated to answer each question. You can skip over the hard questions until you get a question that you like. Seriously. It's sort of like I'm a big crossword puzzle fan, and when I'm doing crosswords, I skip over the hard ones until I can get something easy, and then start filling in and start building on that, and then I can figure out the hard ones from there. I think kind of the same concept works in our brains that way. Plus, you don't let yourself become overly anxious. I had a woman taking a class from me several years ago. After failing the exam, she came in and she admitted she spent 20 minutes struggling over the first question on her exam. It was kind of a doozy, and she admitted to having a lot of trouble, and then that threw her off the rest of the exam. Plus, if you do the math, you only have a few minutes you can devote to each question in order to get it done in the time frame. So you can't spend 20 minutes on one and expect to be able to give enough attention to the other. So anyway, so Delmir, thank you for that question. Probably spend more time on that than I normally do, but I like to share that in this slide as kind of a reminder. Suleiman asks, in going through the BABAC guide, is going through the BABAC guide enough to pass the ECBA certification exam? Well, it kind of depends on your test taking ability. I think you need to read the BABAC exam, before you take your exam. And how are you doing in terms of absorbing it? I knew a woman who came from a marketing background that wanted to get an ECBA, and the BABAC was just totally foreign to her. So like landing on the planet Mars and just not being in her element. So she would not be able to pass an exam. She'd need to take a class and do some other practice. So it depends on your background, depends on your testing ability and your ability to read and absorb and go. So there are like 4 different basic learning styles. And if you're one of them that can independently study and read and absorb information that way without having to go to a class, without doing a lot of practice, without need to talk things out, whatever, then you might be okay. Mukesh, about content. Okay, thanks. Naveen is asking, hello, I've been working as a BA for close to 8 years. Is having the ECBA before taking the CBAP mandatory? No, it is not. If you've been BA for 8 years, you probably have enough hours to qualify. One of the slides, here, let me go back to more normal drawing mode, right here. The slide that says IIBA certification exam overview shows you need to have 7,500 hours in the last 10 years to qualify for CBAP. For CCBA, you need 3,750. So I'm assuming you're gonna have one of those two, and I don't think you should start with ECBA if you have that much experience. I really think you ought to go for that. And by the way, it's not a progression. You don't have to take one and then the other and then the other. You can jump right into the CBAP if you wish. Okay, what would you recommend in terms of the achieving these sequentially? I think I answered that part of your question. I wouldn't do it. I would go straight for CBAP. And if you don't have enough hours, then start with CCBA. Nina was asking, studying from the BABAC is enough to pass the CBAP exam? Well, let me go back to what I said about the ECBA. It's even more true about CBAP. I think some people can do that. They can read the BABAC and go in and pass the exam. again, their learning styles are such that they are able to do that. I kind of did that to pass the CBAP. And I remember getting into the exam and feeling very stressed out, thinking that I had underprepared because I wasn't ready for the kinds of questions they asked me. And somehow I did manage to pass, but contrast that with my PMP experience, I did plenty of exam practice. I took a class, I did some independent reading, and did a lot of different supplemental things to help me because I wasn't as confident in passing the PMP. But so it really depends on your style. I would never suggest just reading the Babak enough. I really think you also minimally look at some exam questions. Opayamini, I'm sorry for mispronouncing your name. How many times would you advise I read through the Babak before the exam? Well, minimally once, but I also think that if you're struggling with any of the chapters, going back and rereading makes sense. And the best way to do that, to me, the best feedback kind of loop possible is to do the practice exams and see where you're struggling and go back and read those sections. Maybe not every page, but one thing that we've prided ourselves in our online study exam is that we give Babak reference numbers for correct and most of the incorrect answers. That way you can go back into the Babak and look at that section directly and read about what it is that you may have had trouble with if you got the answer wrong. And so that really helps you pinpoint and focus your study so you don't have to re-read it completely twice. Suleiman is asking, I've noticed you have a PMP. I do. Does that make an average business analyst better at their job? It depends. Part of the reason I got the PMP was I wanted a certification to bolster my confidence, increase my learning, and improve my credibility as an instructor and consultant. Now, I do think knowing more and more about how to manage projects does make me a better business analyst. It doesn't necessarily mean a PMP will get me there. That's one avenue. And I do think certifications are a great way to do two things. One, you will learn about something. And number two, having that credential is certainly a source of pride and distinction. And having that is something that employers and clients and colleagues do respect. So I think, to me, getting a certification accomplishes both of those things. And so being a very practical person, I think the answer to the question is yes. It will make you better at your job because you will have learned more. But of course, the key in all of this is being able to apply it. You know, having book smarts is not necessarily the same as translating into action. So that's always the key variable, isn't it, on any certification. Amita is asking, hello, what's the level of difficulty for AAC in comparison to the CBAP? Well, I've not taken AAC yet, but my colleagues that have taken it have told me that it's a fairly easy exam compared to the CBAP. Now, what does that mean? You still need to read the Agile extension to the Babak and understand some basic principles. But I think in general, if you're already a CBAP and you read that extension, it certainly doesn't take 100 hours of study to accomplish that. But if you're not a CBAP, that means I think you need to have some familiarity with the Babak. Certainly reading the techniques that apply to Agile in the Babak is a must. And I think that's true in general, whether you're CBAP or not. I think you want to read all of the Agile related techniques in the Babak as well as the Agile extension. Okay, Mukesh is asking a question. How many questions should be correctly answered in order to pass the exam? Is it 80%? I don't think it's that high. I think my best guess is 70% based on things I've heard and people have said. IIBA doesn't release the exact cut score, but 70% should be sufficient. We usually recommend 80%, and you saw that in my little list of tips, because we want you to be over-prepared. Our philosophy at Watermark Learning is to over-prepare you so that you go into your exam very confident and thinking that the exam is easy. And we get no better compliment than when people tell us they passed and our preparation made it seem like the questions were easy. So that's our definite goal. And so we suggest that you do that. But why 80% and why not 100%? Well, if you try to get 100% of our questions right on our practice exams, or any practice exam for that matter, that means you started to memorize those questions. That can even happen at the 80% level, but for sure it's going to start happening at 100%. So that's not helping you understand the BABAC material. And so that's really the key to passing your exam, we think, is understanding the BABAC well enough so that you can apply the questions being asked of you to solve those problems that you're going to run into in the exam. Alex is asking, is it possible that the CCBA and CBAP have the same question bank? I don't think so. Now, in our online exam, we do share some questions because, again, we're testing you on the CBAP, and we have, hundreds or maybe over 1,000 questions, like in the case of CBAP, that we have to invent. IIBA only has like 100 and whatever questions, like 120 or what is it in CCBA, 130 questions that they've got. So it's easier for them to have two separate banks. Now, there's still probably some overlap, I'm guessing, in their exams too, but we don't know, and they would never admit it. So the key here, Alex, I think, in what you're asking is you're going to be tested on some of the same concepts in either exam. So, and that's partly why we don't have a separate CCBA class. Think of our CBAP CCBA as being, preparation for really understanding the BABAC well enough to pass an exam and to really to apply it in the future onto the job. So we're aiming for both of those things. Uche is asking, can I have a recording of this webinar? Yes, you may. We're going to publish that at the end, and so we'll send you an email that you'll get from us. Wayne is asking, hi, I'm currently preparing for the IIBA-AAC certification. My question is, how do you compare the Watermark Learning simulation exam to the real exam questions? The comparison is that we looked at the Agile extension and the BABAC techniques and used the guidelines, the different, plateaus or whatever they're called in horizons, I guess, sorry, to frame our questions according to what we think might be on the real exam. And so our idea is to help you understand the underlying Agile extension and the BABAC techniques well enough to pass. Wayne is saying, what's the rough percentage you need to get from the practice exam in order to pass the AAC exam? Again, we think shooting for 80% is always a good guideline to feel confident going into the real thing. We've had people that were only getting 60 or 70% ended up passing. We've had people that get 90% on our exams and end up failing. So it's no guarantee, but it's a useful guideline. It's probably helpful in most cases, I'd say. Mukesh is saying, how can we get access to the past year's exams? I'm not quite sure what you're asking, Mukesh. Past year's exams that you took, or what are you asking? So please send me in a follow-up question if you could. Nino says, is there any statistic about how many people has a CBAP? Yes, IIBA publishes those. We have something on our website called the certification tracker, and it's not totally up to the minute, but we update it every so often. So check our website and search for Cert Tracker or Certification Tracker. Christine is asking, I thought the work experience requirement for CBAP was 7,500 hours in the past 7 years. No, it's in the past 10 years. And CCBA is in the past 7. So, from time to time, IIBA changes the process, and this is a good time to remind you about that change that we're aware of now, and that is about references. Those of you that are applying know you need to supply 2 references for CBAP and CCBA. You don't have to do that for ECBA. So the references have been kind of a stumbling block, but it's not going to hold you up from applying now like it used to. You do have to supply references, but IIBA will only contact those references if you are audited. And a small percentage, maybe 10%, I'm guessing, of applications are ever audited, so that your application can go forward even if your references have not responded yet. So that's a change. Another change that they've instituted, and it's probably not even recent, but I want to mention it at least, when you're applying, you have to pay for the application before you start. And that's different than in the past. So from time to time, they'll make little changes like that for their process. So, all right, Ricardo saying, for the AAC exam, do we have a study guide? No, we do not. What we do have is a class that comes with a kind of a study guide, if you will. So that's available for you, but we don't have a separate study guide, a standalone study guide. Nino says, should we memorize which technique is used in which approach? I don't think so. IIBA has an Appendix B in the BABAC that matches up techniques and tasks. I think that's better as a reference. If you're struggling and you want to find out, how a technique might be applied, check that out, but I don't think it would be helpful to memorize that. I think it's better, speaking of techniques, to have a familiarity with techniques, each one of them, and not necessarily memorize all the details about them, but you're going to be tested. You don't know which ones you are. That Appendix B can help you focus, because the techniques that are used in the most tasks naturally have a greater chance of you being tested on them. So I would take a look at that and use that as a guide to know which techniques you want to focus on, as far as understanding some of the details. Mukesh is saying, do we have any platform where we can get access to the CBAP previous year examination questions? I mean, the CBAP examination questions from IIBA? No, there's no such platform, if that's what you're asking. There's no way to get those previous ones. IIBA would never release those. Cheryl is saying, do I need to apply for the ECBA before I take a class to get my 21 hours? No, you do not. We always suggest that you apply for your exam before you take a class, but there's no such requirement from IIBA on that. The reason we suggest that is that we've seen plenty of times people take a class and then end up procrastinating and procrastinating and procrastinating. I was such a one when I took my PMP class. I procrastinated for 2 years, and then I finally took the exam. By then, the benefits of the class really start to wear out. So if you wait until you've applied, at least then the clock is ticking. You got 1 year in order to complete your exam. So that's some more motivation for that. So that's one reason why we make that suggestion. Ricardo is asking, what's the cost of your AAC course? Online or virtual? It is both. It's online and virtual live, as well as the recorded version. It's called an ATL, or Anytime Learning. So we have both of those. Hold on 1 second. I'm going to have to pause and go look up what the cost of the class is. If you guys could just hold on, and any other questions, please shoot them in, because we're running out of time, and I still have some time for more questions. So while I look up the cost of the IIBA-AAC, you guys can be submitting your questions into me. Okay, so here we go. So the next class, June 26th, is $495. That's the early bird price until June 11th. So you still have some time to take advantage of that. So that's a very reasonable price. Let me see, Anytime Learning version of that, IIBA-AAC. Wait, that's a heck of a price. That's quite a sale price, because the self-paced learning, which gives you 90 days access, is $725. So the AAC prep course is quite a bargain right now, and is a nice sale price essentially. So, oh, I know, because they've reduced. I'm sorry, we've reduced it down to 1 day, more of a refresher kind of thing. So the Anytime Learning is a 2-day version, so it's longer, maybe a little bit more in depth. The 1-day version is kind of just a focus in on the things you need to know in order to pass your exam. Watermark also offers a 2-day Agile Business Analysis course, which runs prior to that AAC course, and that is for people that are brand new to Agile Business Analysis. So the combination package of all 3 days is available, but if you just want to focus in on the test preparation, we have the 1-day version available. So there you have that scoop here. Okay, so Nino, I hope that answers your question. Yes, we'll put the prices into the email. Jeremy is saying, wait a second, let me get oriented here in the question panel. Whoops, no, Nino's next question. Is in the CBAP exam questions from the perspective chapter? No, there are really no questions from the perspectives. That's a good supplement to the BABOK, but I would suggest just reading it once and then not even studying anymore. Okay, now Jeremy, I took the CBAP prep class last October and never accessed the online questions. Is there an expiry date on access, or does the clock start the moment I took the first practice? When you log in and start using the exam, that's when the clock starts ticking. If for some reason you started, maybe took one exam and then didn't use it again, do check with us, because we can extend your subscription and we can check to see that you really haven't used it. So write into info@watermarklearning.com. Nino says the schedule, sure. Email costs schedule of AAC. You betcha. Ricardo is saying, the AAC, do I get a pass or fail? My employer will pay if I get a pass or fail. If you complete the AAC, do you mean the AAC class or the AAC exam? Because certainly you'll know if you pass the exam when you take that, or the class. We could provide you a passing score so you can get paid back. So again, go through the info mailbox at watermarklearning.com and talk to one of the training consultants there. They can help get you squared away with that. Nina saying, do you have online classes? Yes, we have virtually all, no pun intended there, virtually all of our certification classes are virtual. We found that rather than on the ground in-person classes, except in our home base of Minneapolis, we have much better success running the virtual online courses to get a broad array of people from all over the world. So think of all of our classes, unless you live in the Minneapolis area. But if you'd like to go to Minneapolis, we've started this year to do what we call blended learning, where there are some students in Minneapolis in a live venue, but also students that are virtual. Naveen says, is it $475 for the ATL? On the website, it's $1475. Well, the ATL, I looked it up, was $725. So I'll confirm, and we'll confirm that. Excuse me. By the way, we'll confirm all of that by email. So we'll get you that from Watermark. Okay. Nino says, from your point of view, which exam is harder, PMP or CBAP? Ooh, now that's a tough one. For me, the PMP was harder because I had less experience as a project manager. Plus, you also had to memorize more formulas. And I'm more of a natural business analyst at heart, and my job experience is more in that line. So answering the BA questions was easier. Now, to complicate things, in version 3 of the BABAC, you have these case study questions that did not exist when I took my exam. And that makes the CBAP exam, in my opinion, harder than ever, because you need to be able to answer more complex case studies. Now, our online practice simulations have several case studies to let you practice from, and that gets you prepared for them. But still, I'd say I give a slight nod to the P&P being harder. Ricardo is saying employer will pay for the class. So yeah, you can get practice exam scores that show that you passed the exam, Ricardo. That's good. Okay. So Russell, thank you for attending. Great information. I plan to take ECBA certification. And when do you plan on that, Russell? Good luck to you. Again, I suggest for ECBA that you read the BABAC at least once to become familiar with it, because the 50 questions come straight out of the BABAC. And we have a online study exam to help you if you want to get some practice on that. Now, we are past time, so if you guys have to go, bear in mind that we will have the recording available and make that available through the email that comes out to you. So, but I don't see any more questions, so we can call it a day. And usually when I say that kind of last call, then we get a couple more. So good, that's working again. Michelle, if a person is torn between doing CCBA versus CBAC, what would you say is the defining difference? Well, my question back to you, Michelle, is how many hours of BA experience do you have? How close to the 7,500 hours are you? That makes a difference. So please send me a follow-up. Tell me about approximately how many hours of experience. That's the differentiator. That's the defining difference for me, because I think CBAP has the most cachet, and if you're close to the 7,500 hours, I would push for that. If you're closer to having 3 or 4, maybe even 5,000 hours, I think the CCBA is a good place to start. If you're in the neighborhood of 6,000 or more, then I would put in a couple more hours to get that. Now you have 10 years of experience. Is it better to pass the CBAP than the CPA? Yes, it is. Again, assuming those 10 years, Nino, means you have the 7,500 hours behind you. So the number of hours is really critical, really key. I think there's some virtue in getting the CCBA, because then you start understanding the BABAC and how to pass a complex exam. It's not as hard as a CBAP, so it's a good starting place, but that's, to me, a side benefit. It all boils down to the number of hours, because there's still a certain amount of time and money and anxiety and worry that goes into passing an exam. So if you have enough hours to qualify or close to it for the CBAP, I'd go straight for that one. Okay, folks, well, there are no more, one or two more maybe. Is the BABAC Guide version 3 still current for the, oh yes. Yes, it is, Christina. It will be for the next year or two, because BABAC 4 is just in the early planning stages, and it'll take a lot more to create it, number one, and then create the exam structure, number two. It's going to be at least 2 years, where BABAC 3 is still good, and probably be more than that, but I think 2 years is a very conservative number. So guys, thank you very much. I really look forward to the next chat. That will be, whoops, I scrolled too fast. There we go. The next chat, June 7th. It says 11 p.m. Central. That should say 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. So please bear that in mind. We're not going to do it. You folks in Singapore or India might like that, but here in the U.S., it's going to be 11 a.m. So thank you very much, and all the best to you in passing your exam. And you guys have a great day now. Thank you very much.